Disputes Decoded with me, Chris Campbell. This is an ArbTech podcast series where we will take a deep dive into a variety of legal tech issues by way of candid interviews with selected subject matter experts. Technology has, and always will, have a profound impact on dispute resolution. And in this series, we'll give you insights into where we're going next. We will demystify complex concepts, decode the jargon, and provide practical insights on advancements across the legal tech space. Join us as we navigate this future where law and tech converge. Welcome to Disputes Decoded, where we download the field of arbitration into the future. And to kick off this very special conversation and series of conversations, we have two, not just one, but two special guests with us today, Dr. Ramin Rahnema and Colin Rule. Gentlemen, welcome to the show. Hi, Colin. Hi, Ramin.
Happy to be here. Thanks, Chris.
Hi, Chris. Hi, Colin. Happy to be here.
Today, we're going to talk about a hot, sizzling issue that's been on everyone's mind in 2023, not just in the disputes resolution space, but really all industries. And that is artificial intelligence, AI, and what that might look like, what that might mean, and what the impact might be for international disputes and dispute resolution more broadly. But before we jump into that, let's talk a little bit about the guest that we have here. Let the audience get to know you, and then sort of jump into the topic from there. So, Ramin, we'll start with you. Can you tell us a bit about yourself, maybe a little bit about your background, and well, as listeners will have heard me call you doctor, about a bit about your PhD and what that road has looked like.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I should correct you on that. I'm still far from being a doctor. It's only the third year now, so hopefully I will get there at some point. But as to my background, I'm originally from Iran, all the way in the Middle East. And somewhere about 7-8 years ago, I wanted to continue my studies in law, and I wanted to go outside to be at the forefronts to study it more internationally. And I was thinking of where I should go, and I really wanted to go to the US, but you guys charge ridiculous amounts for tuition.
Guilty as charged.
Yeah. So somewhere around 30,000 or something. So I was priced out of that market, essentially. So I was looking at Europe, and I saw the Netherlands. I did not speak a word of Dutch then, so I needed to study it in English. So I went to the University of Groningen. That's how you pronounce it correctly in Dutch. And I started a bachelor's and went on to a master's. And as I was studying my master's, I really got interested in the field of ADR in general, and specifically arbitration. And really the reason for that was that I found arbitration to really be the best of both worlds as far as law goes. I was not initially a lover of the law. I was not a fan of the formality of the long time it takes to get a resolution. All those problems usually we associate with the law, the stress. So I thought arbitration would be a nice alternative to that. Lo and behold, we now know that that's not exactly also true in arbitration these days. But that really drew me to arbitration initially. And also, I was also a nerd back then. I think I've heard Colin refer to yourself as nerd also previously. So
I think we're all nerds here. You're in a nerd-friendly environment, safe space.
Yeah, so I'm happy to report that it's not a negative thing anymore. It's cool now. So it's good to be in 2023. So I really wanted to try and combine my love of technology with my interest in arbitration, I should say, at that point. But I found myself really in the minority at that point. This was about, say, 2019. And there were only a handful of people who were really active in the field of technology and arbitration, Colin being one of them. But I had difficulty to find like-minded people back then. And so I wrote my dissertation at my master's on online arbitration, as I called it then. And this was about the end of 2019, early 2020. And as you know, of course, then COVID hit. So I had written my dissertation then, but I was interestingly at a point where technology and arbitration had become suddenly extremely interesting and relevant, just as COVID had hit. So I had done my dissertation, but I was kind of feeling a little down that I didn't get to experience this newfound interest in arbitration. So somewhere in 2021, I got back to my supervisor. I asked if he would be interested in me doing a PhD and continuing this research when I had missed it when COVID hit. And we talked about a proposal, but this time he suggested that we should perhaps include AI as we go into the future, because that is the next step as we move past digitization. So now I'm doing the PhD in that field, essentially half and half. The first part looking at digitization, the legal problems that we have still with that process, the imperfections that we have, and now looking at AI and how we can use that in the arbitral process, and how what legal problems might come up at that point. And obviously, when I started, ChatGPT was still not a thing. So when that happened, that actually gave us a specific direction as far as research goes, but we can talk about that later on. But this is basically a very general overview of how I got here.
No, that's great. And we're going to, like you just suggested, we're going to put a pin right there and come right back to you in just a moment, because we want to introduce this other fellow that's here on the line with us. Colin, same question. You find yourself often in legal tech spaces and have a little bit of a non-traditional route into this legal world that we're talking about today. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Absolutely. And I'm glad to be here with my fellow nerds in a safe space. We've reclaimed it. I'm old enough to remember when nerd was a pretty hard slur in middle school. You did not want to be a nerd, but there was a movie called Revenge of the Nerds. Maybe that's what's playing out around us, as technology takes over. But actually, a lot of what Ramin said resonates with me. I guess it's non-traditional, I guess, my route, because I'm not a lawyer. My background's actually in public policy, but I was trained in mediation in the late 80s. And I was like, this is it. This is what I want to do. I actually wanted to be a peacemaker, but it's kind of hard to figure out, what does that mean? How do you get trained to be a peacemaker? But then I was actually trained in mediation and said, oh, that's what this is. This is practical peacemaking. So I started with mediation, but really became enamored of the whole dispute resolution field. So learned about the evaluative stuff later. But I am a nerd and I love playing with technology, and I started a couple companies, and it's been really fun to see the growth of the online dispute resolution field. This week is actually ADR Cyber Week, which has been running for 25 years from the National Center for Technology and Dispute Resolution at UMass Amherst. So we have all these presentations that are happening from people all over the world applying technology to dispute resolution. And we just had a session yesterday. We're talking about how far we've come. It's amazing to think ODR back in 2000, 2001, we didn't have social networks. We didn't have iPhones. We didn't have generative AI. We didn't have Zoom. All these tools have appeared, and they weren't created for dispute resolution, but we've absorbed them and put them in our toolbox. And it's really, really exciting to think about where all of this is leading. So it's fun. I remember doing conference sessions on online dispute resolution, and no one would show up. It would be just me and Ethan Catch. You were like, we're not interested in this. And now it's great. We have we have a center. We have a conference we do every year. We just met in Montreal a couple of weeks ago, and it's just growing. I mean, we had a conference in the spring in Bangalore, and we were going to have 400 spots, and that sold out. So then they raised it to 500, and then that sold out. And then there were people at the door. The average age of the attendees were 28, 29. And they were so excited about using technology to build a new justice system. It's infectious, their energy. And they are digital natives. They've grown up in a world where technology is just omnipresent, and they have a facility with it probably that I'll never achieve. So it's gratifying to have started a snowball rolling down the side of the mountain, but now it's going to get bigger and bigger. So I'm delighted to be here with you and talk about OARB and where all of this is headed.
Well, absolutely. And well, look, Colin, if you haven't done one already, we look forward to getting an invitation link to your TED Talk.
This is my TED Talk, Chris. I can't do better than this.
Oh man,
TED would be a letdown after ArbTech.
Look, we'll take that. We'll take that as a accommodation for on our first episode. Ramin, we're going to come back to that pen. Can you give us a little, maybe like an elevator speech, or sort of an overview, a little bit more deeper into your dissertation? You talked about a little bit, your thesis, I guess I should say, instead of your dissertation, for your PhD. Can you tell us some about that?
Yeah, for sure. The first part, really, the part that's about digitization, I use that really as a basis to move on to AI. The point with digitization is that it really is a fleeting thing. So we saw it happening during the COVID years, but now already we see people moving back into physical hearings and using paper documents and just reverting back to all the problems arbitration had. So I really want to pinpoint how important it is to keep putting attention and finding new ways to improve digitization in arbitration. And one of the points that I really want to argue in my thesis is the development of an end-to-end, fully digital online arbitration case management platform that is used by traditional arbitration institutions. So in that sense, the proceedings will be safer. It'll be much easier to review the documents and have the hearings, and essentially also have the award rendered at the end digitally. So this will be the first part, but the second part of the dissertation is the part about AI. So initially, my thesis was not supposed to be about generative AI. I was also caught off guard a little bit in 2022 when OpenAI came out with ChatGPT 3.5, and I think everyone kind of was. But the capabilities of that machine really gave some direction to my research. And now I'm looking at using a tool like ChatGPT, not ChatGPT specifically, as an assistive function for the arbitrators or for the counsel in the arbitral process. And in that research, I also look at the legal problems that might come up, even as using AI in assistant function. And hopefully we see how we can go forward and find out what the use cases of AI is in arbitration.
I think that's a long elevator.
Yeah.
But that's really interesting though. And I mean, and like you said, timely, right? Because I don't think, the conversation as we sit here today, this is the least that people will talk about AI and its usages going forward. That's only going to increase. And so we have to be prepared and aware how these things work and how they can change and be impactful in our careers. And the one point that I will make before my next question is one of the frustrating things that I have sometimes in talking with people about it is they talk about AI as if it's, let's keep with the nerd theme, like it's the force or it's like some sort of magic that like, oh, well, we'll just use AI to figure out this case. And it's like, okay, but AI doesn't think, right? I mean, you have to guide it, you have to instruct it. It's a tool, as you would with Westlaw, as you would use with any tool. You can't just sort of just say AI do the thing and it will do it with any sort of high level of accuracy. And I think that is still a major missing gap.
Absolutely agreed, Chris. I think this little image that we have of AI in general, it's coming from perhaps it's coming from a little bit of science fiction that we've seen over the years, and it's always the AI, the Terminators that's going to come and destroy everything. And that may happen in the future, but the AI that we have today is completely different from what we get in our minds from science fiction. And people, I think, especially the legal people, don't really have an idea as to what that AI is. So it's really helpful to try and demystify it a little bit.
I love the idea of AI as the force, Chris. My friend Noam, who wrote a book on Star Wars and dispute resolution, would love that. These are not the arbitrators that you're looking for, that kind of thing. But I think you're right. It's a little bit of a Rorschach test. I had whole discussions with people who are experts in machine learning, and you say, "What is AI?" Well, not everybody agrees. I mean, there's a lot of confusion about that. And Ramin, what you said really resonates with me. I know people that have been working in machine learning and putatively AI for 20 years. And then ChatGPT came out and they said, oh, wow, okay, I have to throw away everything I've been doing because, these breakthroughs happen. And it takes not only what the technology is capable of to the next level, but it also takes people's conception of what the technology could mean to the next level. And I think we're witnessing a bit of a cultural change as people look at the power of these tools and say, wait a minute, how is this relevant to the work that I do? And that's certainly happening in the legal sphere and dispute resolution.
Colin, staying with that thought right there and not asking you to, look into the crystal ball too much, but I mean, with the technology that we have now, I mean, what do you see as the sort of the fence, right? I mean, what do you think that the AI, when you think of AI and how it's applied to dispute resolution, what is sort of the parameters? What do you think it's capable of doing in a practical sense?
Well, you're right. That's a trick that I'm going to have to look in the crystal ball a little bit. I will say, having watched the growth and sort of mainstreaming of online dispute resolution, there's a certain curve to it. At the beginning, it's early adopters. There was a series of commercials in the United States in the early 1990s called "You Will," and you can look them up on Wikipedia if you want to. They were narrated by Tom Selleck, and it was all about, have you ever sent a fax from the beach? You will. Have you ever put your kids to bed from a telephone booth on the other side of the country? You will. Have you ever just driven through the toll booth? You will. And at the time, it sounded like science fiction. I mean, all of this stuff, like, what? How is this even possible? And the irony thing is, if you go back and you look, because all the videos are on YouTube, everything happened. Everything that they described has happened. And now it's just normal and it's not even interesting. And I think Gen Zers would look at those commercials and say, what's the big deal? And there was a time when ODR was like that too. I mean, I would do presentations and say, hey, look, we're going to conduct mediations over video conferencing. We're going to digitally draft our documents together and then file them with the court automatically. Have you ever threw all of your panelists online and selected you will, like we could make our you will commercials in dispute resolution. But the thing is, a lot of the things that we do with technology and dispute resolution now have just been completely normalized. And it's not particularly inventive or futuristic or even sexy. It's just the new normal. And I think now AI is on the cutting edge. We have this new tool. It seems powerful. We know there are limitations because we know it hallucinates. We know that, there are issues. So it's not like we just want to turn everything over to this new tool. We're going to spend a lot of time, and that's why I applaud Ramin for doing all of his research. We got to think about, well, how do we make this thing abide by the ethical standards we have in the field? It can't just be rolling the dice. I think for artificial intelligence and digital arbitrators to really become mainstream, they'd have to be not only as good as human processes, but even better, measurably better. And we have to have quality metrics and KPIs that can establish that consistency and trust. And that's when we'll start to see the tipping point happen. I think we're still a ways away from that. We have a lot of work to do between here and there. But those of us who are on this leading edge and who are playing with these tools, I think we can see the promise and potential, because there are a lot of limitations. I mean, Ramin's mentioning my friend Tom Stepanowicz. He's talked about how arbitration is the new litigation. It's supposed to be streamlined. It's supposed to be more efficient. It's supposed to be easier to access. And it's just kind of gotten gummed up in the way that the courts are gummed up. You have the same amount of discovery and the same amount of motions and inefficiency, and the costs are ballooning. So does AI give us a vision of a future where we could, this is what they talk about, disruptive innovation, take something that's very expensive and complicated and accessible to only a small population, and then change it so that it can be much cheaper, much easier to access, and then expand access to a much larger segment of the population. And I think, those of us, and I think the three of us are in this world kind of looking at these tools, we see, wow, there's some promise here. There's some potential here. We got a lot of work to do to get it right. But it's exciting to think about where this might lead us and how this could help expand access to fast and fair resolution. That's kind of, I love peering in the crystal ball, Chris. Push me harder. I'll get us on flying carpets and, telepathy. But that's what I think we have our hands around, that reality right now.
Well, yeah, and look, I'll avoid stepping on my soapbox about how arbitration is becoming too much like litigation. That's another episode. But you raise a lot of interesting points there, Colin, and I don't recall if it was you or Ramin that used this term, but I'll ask you to help us define it. When folks use the word or the term generative AI, their eyes may glaze over. They might think, was that the double jeopardy question from a couple of weeks ago?
Right.
They may not know what that means. Can you tell us and break it down for us? What is generative AI as far as you understand, or how it's kind of being used and employed so far?
Sure. Well, I will say I did a presentation to a bunch of Israeli computer scientists in Haifa. And my first slide was, the promise of AI in dispute resolution. Put up my slide and I said, I'm glad to be here. And someone raised their hand in the audience. These are all professors in computer science. I said, oh, you have a question right off the bat? What's your question? He said, what do you mean by AI? And I said, machine learning. And the guy said, machine learning is not AI. And then the audience just broke into a conversation about what is AI. And I completely lost the thread. I realized I'm out of my depth here. These are all PhDs in computer science. So these terms can get confusing, especially for lay people that haven't spent a lot of time using them. Now, generative AI is a particular type of artificial intelligence that is all about producing content. So that could be text, could be images, could be audio, could be data. There's a lot of buzz around it, but actually it's not new. Generative AI first was created in the 1960s. A lot of the technology that undergirds machine learning and artificial intelligence has been around for a long time, but it's just been accelerated by the power of computer processors and our ability to store a lot of data. But it was in 2014 where computer scientists introduced a new technique called generative adversarial networks, which is a kind of machine learning algorithm that really took generative AI to the next level. So it could start to generate really authentic images and videos and audio. It kind of took it to the next level. Now, the other thing that's a recent advancement is what they call transformers. Transformers are a type of machine learning that makes it possible for researchers to train even larger models without having to label the data in advance. It used to be machine learning. You'd have to get a lot of data, but you have to structure it so that your machine learning algorithm could make sense of it. And now these transformers allow you to take enormous amounts of data. And that's really what's led to what they call large language models, LLMs. Yeah, and that's what ChatGPT is. That's what Google Bard is. That's what Claude from Anthropic is. They're going out and taking a snapshot of the whole internet, enormous amounts of data, and then cranking it through a bunch of processors to figure out patterns, to determine patterns. And then they're using that to supercharge these generative AI techniques. So again, these things have been happening over decades. And a lot of the techniques, when you think about it from a computer science perspective, are not that radically new. They're well documented, but it's just the scale And I think the breakthrough, as Ramin said, I was at a conference of a bunch of AI and law researchers at Stanford. And there are people who've been working in this for 20 years, training data, structuring data sets, using machine learning. And then they saw ChatGPT and they said, oh, I have to throw out everything that I did, because nobody knew that that was possible to come up with that kind of breakthrough. There's something called the Turing test, which is where you're interacting with an algorithm and you can't really tell if it's an algorithm or a person. And we haven't really had a technology that could pass that. And then ChatGPT 3.5 came out, and suddenly, oh my gosh, wow, it passes it. And then 4 came out. 4 can pass the bar exam in California in 5 minutes. It can pass the GMAT. It's amazing the capabilities of this technology. And now the race is on, because all of these big companies are spending billions of dollars. That's not an exaggeration. Adding new functionality, training ever larger, more powerful models. And every time we get a new processor out of NVIDIA, it's like, okay, great, we can go deeper, we can learn more, we can find more correlations in the data. So I think that's where generative AI has led us. So Ramin, tell me what I got wrong, because you're the guy doing your PhD on this.
No. I think you got it perfectly right. And the 2 points that I want to add here is that as I was beginning to do research on this field, I was also a lawyer, so I had no idea what AI really was. So the best definition that I could find, I think it was given by Marvin Minsky, who's one of the main pioneers of AI already, I think in the 50s. And he gave a definition to the effect of AI is the ability of a machine to do tasks that would require intelligence if a human were doing those tasks. So I think that's a very good definition, a bit broad definition that gives us an idea of what sort of tasks we're talking about when we give it to the AI. But the problem with that definition is that it is extremely broad, because as Colin said, we have database AI, which includes machine learning, it includes neural networks and deep learning. But then you also have all these other AI techniques that were really popular in the 50s and 60s, the rule-based, the logic-based, the knowledge-based AIs that are also included within this definition. But the AI that we talk about today, the generative AI, that is almost exclusively neural network, deep learning AI, which are, as Colin said, large language models. So these AI models are basically working with language, which means they are extremely relevant to a field like arbitration and law, because we also work very closely with language, and particularly with written text more and more. So their uses are very evident already from the moment we had ChatGPT. And the second point I wanted to raise is that the progress with large language models has been exponential in the last year. So if you already go back, and I was looking at a lecture by Professor Harry Surton, and he said you can already check what GPT-1 and GPT-2 were like. So if you go back and if you check GPT-2 or even GPT-3, they're not great. They have a lot of problems. But suddenly, within a year or so, the formula seemed to snap in together, and suddenly it's working perfectly, with not perfectly, but still close to perfect as far as we were aware of how these language models work. So the progress has been exponential in the last year. Now we can get into whether this is to be expected as we go forward. Every year is going to be this much progress. I think that's very debatable. That may not happen again for another couple of years. But the fact is that the progression in AI language models has been exponential in just the past year.
I have a friend who works in data science, and he said, from the legal tech and dispute resolution perspective, we don't really want artificial intelligence. What we want is artificial judgment, because intelligence is a little bit of a philosophical concept. I mean, there's a guy at Harvard who talks about multiple intelligence. There's lots of different kinds of ways to be intelligent. You could be a genius at writing a symphony, but then you can't code Java. And you could be a genius at coding Java, but that doesn't mean that you can, do the high jump. Intelligence is a little bit, and that's why I think this term AI is a little bit fuzzy. But for me, it clarifies it when we talk about, okay, judgment. Judgment is a very specific thing. And that's a lot of what we're asked to do, particularly in the arbitration space. We're looking for a specific kind of application of these things. And that's why I don't think we can't just go use ChatGPT off the shelf and say, all right, we're going to have ChatGPT decide our arbitrations. No, we need to work a little bit more. And actually, Sam Altman the other day at OpenAI, they've announced a new program where they're going to make lots of GPTs. So anybody can go get their own instance of a generative large language model AI and train it itself. So we're going to see thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of different LLMs all trained on different data. And that's a great thing. It's great to let 1,000 flowers bloom. We're going to have to wrap our heads around what that means. in the arbitration space, definitely.
And before we sort of leave the topic, at least this element of the topic, Ramin, I want to put the same question to you that Colin was answering a few moments ago. What are some of the, I guess, practical implications or practical things that you can see for where AI, in the way that we've just discussed it, is now in its current state? I wonder if you have anything to add to what Colin's already put forth.
Yeah, there's a lot of use cases already that you can think of with the AI that is capable of now. The issue is that it's not exactly as reliable as we want it to be. So if we want to talk about its state currently, there are a bunch of use cases that come to mind in the field of arbitration and law. I can highlight a few that I think are extremely helpful as we go forward. I think the first one that comes to mind is conversational research. Legal research. This is, I think, especially useful in international arbitration. We're often dealing with various legal systems from all over the world that we may not be necessarily familiar with. And oftentimes arbitrators are not necessarily appointed with the best features in mind, which is another field that AI could be a solution for, by the way. We can get to that too. So if I'm an arbitrator working in the Netherlands and there's a case that I have to apply some US state law to that case, I may not be able to find all the nuances of that law. I may be able to find the provision, maybe some case law, but there's always some nuance that I might be missing. And with just regular search, we really have to work hard to find that nuance and have it in our case. With conversational legal research using a tool like ChatGPT, especially if it's trained on legal data, as there are a couple of examples now, with a couple of back and forth prompts with the machine, you can really get to the details, to the nuance of that field, and you may be seeing things that you otherwise may have missed if you were just using regular search. So that is extremely helpful already. There are many other uses as well, for example, for the appointment of the arbitrators. I think that's also a very important point, because nowadays we just pick arbitrators from word of mouth. I know a guy, you know a guy, and he's great, so he becomes an arbitrator for our case.
No, that never happens. What do you mean?
That's what I've been told anyway. But so if you can use a more data-based approach, and I know, Chris, correct me if I'm wrong, I think you have interviewed Catherine Rogers of Arbitrator Intelligence, and there are initiatives on that front to bring the appointment of arbitrators more on data. So if you can use a tool like generative AI that can go look at all the information, all the nuances again of how an arbitrator comes to his or her decision. Does he or she prefer bifurcation of the proceedings? What kind of questions do they ask during the hearings? All these little details, they can become metadata that you can consider in your appointment of the arbitrator. So this will be, I think, leading to better appointment of arbitrators, less challenges, less concerns of impartiality and independence, and a general shifting, essentially, of how we pick arbitrators. I think the last point that I would want to highlight here is going back to the generation part of generative AI. The fact that generative AI can generate draft documents for us within an arbitration proceedings, I think that's got to be one of the best use cases for it currently. Now, it has problems. We can get into that later on, but if we could use the generative AI to draft a procedural order based on the information that we got from the transcript, from the hearing, and automate that process, if we can use it to automate parts of the award even, those can bring about very tangible benefits to costs and efficiency in arbitration, which are really points that need improvement at the moment.
Right. All very good points, very interesting points. And well, there's a lot more to still discuss in this conversation, so we'll call it there for right now and come back during the next episode. Gentlemen, don't go anywhere. Listeners, don't turn that dial. Stay tuned for the closing notes, and we'll see you on the next edition. So there you have it. A fantastic introduction to this conversation. You got to meet Ramin, you got to meet Colin, hear a bit about their background, and they talked about all of the variety of ways in which technology intersects with international dispute resolution, and not just the typical things that you may have seen in the run-of-the-mill conversations. So I enjoyed that first conversation. I hope you did too. We got a second half to bring to you as well, but you have to come back next time to get the rest of the story and hear some other ways in which international arbitration is going to be shaped and impacted by AI, generative technology, and similar types of things. A big thank you to Colin and Dr. Ramin, for being with us for this first episode, and we look forward to seeing you in the next one. Listeners, if you're really enjoying this show, make sure you follow ArbTech. Make sure you follow Tales of the Tribunal to make sure you're staying up to date with all of the most recent things in the technology and international arbitration space. A big shout out to Sophie Nappert, as well as Sean McCarty, who have been instrumental in putting this first episode together, as well as the next episode. So thank you so much. We really enjoyed having you. And until next time, you're listening to Disputes Decoded by ArbTech and Tales of the Tribunal. See you next time.